Hi, my name is Staci Smith, and my action research was over movement in the classroom. Before I get started, I wanted to share a quote with you from Kovar and Combs. We believe that feeding a student's body is just as important as feeding their mind, with reading, writing, and math. And then here I have pictured my kindergarten students, and they are sitting in their flexible seating while they're getting their work done. Who am I? I am a Wayne State College graduate in 2014 with a degree in early childhood education and elementary education. I got my first teaching job at Homer Community School. I taught preschool there for 4 years, and next fall I'll be starting my 3rd year of teaching kindergarten. I am just finishing up my master's in curriculum and instruction, and I also got an endorsement, a reading specialist endorsement. And last, I am a mom to a wonderful 10-year-old named Natalie. Here I am pictured with my daughter at my college graduation. This was my daughter's first day of school last year. This was my first day of school. And then here I am pictured with my kindergarten students. You might be wondering why I chose movement as my topic. When you teach early childhood education students, movement is just a natural part of your daily schedule. The students are always walking around. Sometimes they're running around the classroom. They're wiggling, they're dancing, they're talking, and it's just built into your day naturally. But I never really understood why, or if it was important. As I was thinking of a research topic, I kept coming back to movement, and I was questioning, why is it so important for my students to move throughout the day? Is it important? So what would happen if I took it away? Do my students really need movement to be engaged and to learn? Thus, I came up with my research question. Does movement in the classroom have a positive impact on my students, especially in the areas of engagement and academics? There are many different types of movement that you can use in your classroom, so to make it a little easier on myself, I narrowed it down to 3 types. The first type was flexible seating. My students get to choose their own seat as long as they can make good choices. Their options were ball chairs, wobble stools, soft seats, bouncy bands, lap desks. I also had bean bags and pillows, and then they could also choose to just stand if they wanted. In the morning, I have a check-in chart for my students. They check in for hot or cold lunch, and then they can move their name down and choose which flexible seating they'd like to choose as well. The second type of movement I used was brain breaks. Those are just short breaks throughout the day to let the students take a break from academics and just move. Mine were usually done in the morning before we started for the day, always during transitions, before and after lunch, after free choice centers, and at the very end of the day. Some of the options that I used were Go Noodle, and I will show you a sample of that right now. Here is one of the songs that my students really like to do. It was called Little Green Froggy. This is our song. Got it. Now we're going to repeat after me. Okay, yeah? Okay, let's just do the song. There are tons of different songs and games and different things on there for the students to do, and they love that website. Another option I did was drawing sticks with activities or exercises written on them. I just bought the large popsicle sticks, and I wrote different things on them, like jumping jacks, touch your toes, drive like a race car, and then if we had a second throughout the day, I'd have the students pull a stick out for me, and then we'd get to do that exercise. Another thing that I would do is count down from 5 to 1, and I'd have an exercise for each number. So for example, I would say, okay, students, come over to the rug, and I would say, do 5 jumping jacks, do 4 toe touches, do 3 spins, do 2 push-ups, do 1 sit-up, and then when we got to 0, they knew they had to sit down, crisscross, and be ready for the next activity. Another thing we liked to do was yoga. That was a great way to get my kids calm and relaxed and ready for the next activity. I used Cosmic Kids Yoga on YouTube, and I will show you a quick video of that as well. Putting your legs out low in front of you. You're going to tuck your legs This was another great option for my students. It incorporated lots of different yoga moves. It usually tells some sort of story, and it gets them nice and calm and relaxed and ready for the next thing that we're going to do. And the last technique I used was belly breathing. My students would come and sit down, or they could sit at their table spots if that's where they were, and they'd put their both hands on their stomach and breathe in and out really slow, and I'd have them move or feel for their belly to expand and then get smaller. And we'd usually do that about 5 times, and then when we got to 0, again, it was time to move on to the next activity. My final movement type was crossing the midline. The midline is an imaginary line that runs down the center of your body. Crossing the midline is when you reach across your body using your arms or legs to perform a task on the opposite side of your body. Crossing the midline activities are great for coordination, communication of the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and it's been noted to help students with reading and writing and even behavior issues. In my classroom, we would cross the midline when we said the alphabet, spelled sight words, counted, and when we did math problems. Once a day, we did a Balaviz X break, which is a series of balance, auditory, and vision exercises that you can be done involving beanbags, tennis balls, rackets, and balance boards. And I will show you an example of that as well using tennis balls.
This might look like a
With kindergarten, it would get kind of tricky, so we just kept it very simple. I had my students pair up, and they knew to stand a certain amount away from each other. We had tape down on the floor in my room, and they would just get a tennis ball, and they would take it in their right hand and throw it to their partner. They'd have to bounce it once, and then it'd get to their partner. Their partner had to catch it in their left hand, cross their body, and put it in their right hand, and then throw it back to their partner, who would then catch it in their left hand. So then that way they were just crossing their body and practicing those movement types. It was a great way to get both sides of their brain communicating. And I noticed right afterwards when we did social studies or science, they were ready, focused, engaged, and ready to go. How I set up my action research. I did my research over a 10-week span. The first week I introduced and used brain breaks for the entire week. Week number 2, I did not use them at all. For week 3, I introduced and used flexible seating. Week 4, I did not use it at all. Week 5, I introduced and used crossing the midline in Balaviz X. Week 6, I did not use crossing the midline or Balaviz X. Week 7, I used all 3 movement types that I had introduced. Week 8, I used no movement types. Week 9, I used all 3 again. And to end it on week 10, I used no movement types. I had a lot of data to collect, and 10 weeks is a long time, so I came up with a few different ways to collect my data. The first one was using questionnaires. I gave these to kids every week after we had used a movement type or didn't, and they got to answer with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. The questions I asked them were, I learn best when I move around, yes or no. I learn best when I choose my own seat, yes or no. I learn best when I get to have a brain break, yes or no. And I learn best when I cross my midline, yes or no. I also use an engagement checklist daily, so I have my students' names written down, and then every day I would just go through and check. Is the student giving me eye contact? Are they raising hand and answering questions? Are they listening and not talking? Are they reacting? And are they following requests? Another way I collected my data was using assessments. So I gave my students assessments over their letters and numbers weekly. So at the end of the week on Friday, I would ask them their capital letters, their lowercase letters, and their numbers. And then I would just mark which they knew at the end of each week. The last way I collected data was writing field notes. So I would daily write my student's name down and then write just some things I noticed about that child and their behavior, or maybe some quotes that they were saying throughout the day. Data results and graphs. After my 10 weeks of data collection, I analyzed my findings and found that on weeks that I used any movement types, but especially when I used all 3 types, my students' academics and engagements improved. When I look back on my field notes, my students were happy. They were positive, calm, focused, and very engaged on the weeks that we used movement. Some of the quotes that I heard from my students: "I love doing that tennis ball game. I can feel my brain working hard to make sure I use the right hands to throw and catch it. Can't we cross the midline to learn our new sight words? I learn much faster that way." On the weeks that we didn't use any movement, my students were the complete opposite. They were antsy, they were talkative, not engaged, not focused, and they were not ready to learn. A couple of quotes from those weeks were: "I just can't work like this. Is it okay if I stand up to do my work? Can we please just do a super quick brain break because my brain is tired from all this work?" Since I had 10 weeks of data collection, I had tons of graphs, so I just put weeks 9 and 10 on here to share with you, so I didn't overload you. Week 9 engagement. This shows you that when we used all the movement activities on week 9, my students, 90% had eye contact, 90% were raising their hand and answering questions, 90% were listening and not talking, 88% were reacting, and 92% were following requests. Week 10 with no movement activities, 27% had eye contact, 18% were raising their hand and answering questions, 28% were listening and not talking, 23% were reacting, and only 23% were following requests. So you can see a huge difference in those 2 weeks. The assessments for week 9 and 10. On week 9, when we used movement, 94% of my students knew the capital letters. The next week with no movement, only 88% knew them. When we did movement, 98% knew their numbers, and the next week with no movement, 95% knew all of their numbers. The lowercase, 92% when we did movement, and then 86% with no movement. So you can see again that there's a difference when we use the movement and again when we don't. My last thing for this week was student questionnaires. So I will go ahead and read you those questions. The first question I asked them: "I learn best when I move around." When we use movement, 80% said yes. When we didn't use that movement, 94% said yes. I learn best when I choose my own seat. When we use movement, 82% said yes. And we did not use movement. It moved up to 94% said yes. The next slide: "I learn best when I have a brain break." When we were using movement, 88% said yes. And when we were not using movement, 100% said yes, they learn best when they have a brain break. I learn best when I cross my midline. You can see these numbers are a little different. This wasn't their favorite activity, so that's why the numbers are a little bit lower. 65% said yes, they learn best when they cross their midline. But when we didn't use it, the numbers went up. 82% said they learn best when they cross their midline. So even though it wasn't their favorite movement activity, it still increased throughout the time. So what does that mean? I'm going to start off with a quote from Shoecraft 15 that sums this all up pretty well. "When you allow students to move, they're in better moods and more receptive to learning." Throughout my data collection, I found that students were receptive to and enjoyed the brain breaks, flexible seating, and crossing the midline. I also found when I used any movement activities, but especially all 3 of them, students' engagement in academics improved dramatically. Movement is so important for our students because it improves their physical and emotional social health while at the same time improving their engagement and academic performance. My study was able to provide proof that movement in the classroom has countless positive benefits for our students. After conducting research on movement in the classroom, I feel strongly that all teachers, especially early childhood teachers, should incorporate movement into their everyday routines. It's a tool that's free or inexpensive, it has little to no prep work, and can be done in small amounts of time throughout your school day, and can be used by teachers of any age, range, or grade. I cannot stress enough how important movement in the classroom is for our students. I plan to continue to use brain breaks, flexible seating, and crossing the midline activities with my students in my classroom this year and every year to come, and I would urge you to consider adding movement into your classroom routines as well.